1 in 3 of all road accidents and casualties in New South Wales happens on neighbourhood streets, and between 4 and 7 in the afternoon those streets are the most dangerous roads anywhere. Newcastle's casualty rate for road accidents on neighbourhood streets is higher than the state average. For that reason, the Traffic Authority of New South Wales chose Newcastle as one of 10 local government areas in which to try out its new neighbourhood road safety scheme. The 3-month trial scheme was launched by the City Administrator Colin Saunders in the City Hall. The campaign includes radio and television advertising, a letterbox campaign, education of school children, posters and car stickers. If successful in reducing the suburban carnage, the scheme may spread statewide. According to the Traffic Authority, there are several reasons for the high suburban accident rate, but the main one is excessive speed.
Basically, I'd say speed and an unawareness of the driver and the pedestrian of the unsafe situation.
Do the designs of some suburban streets encourage drivers to drive too fast?
Oh, certainly, yeah. The older design standard, which were wide streets, very straight streets, with the motor vehicles we have it today, certainly encourage people to drive far too fast for the situation.
Familiarity with a suburb, it seems, breeds contempt for the speed limit. According to the Traffic Authority, most of the people who speed in a street usually live in the street.
In the Cowra breakout, the cost to the Japanese in terms of lives was high. In 1964, the Japanese government established its own war memorial cemetery near Cowra. The small parcel of land is officially Japanese territory after being handed over by the Australian government.
The inscription on this monument reads, "Dedicated to those killed in war." And the site of this Japanese war cemetery is the actual site of a mass grave dug by Australian soldiers for the 231 Japanese prisoners of war who were killed in the Cowra breakout. It wasn't until sometime after the war that the RSL decided to identify the bodies and create this war memorial we see today.
Since then, Cowra's unique link with Japan has continued to grow, a friendship born from mutual adversity. The town now boasts a Japanese garden and cultural centre, which thousands of tourists visit each year. It's surprising how well the undulating grassland, granite outcrops and eucalypts complement the subtle textures of the Japanese style. Meandering paths, wooden bridges and waterfalls offer an opportunity to explore the subtle delights of the garden. Trish Bryant is Cowra's tourist officer.
Well, there was a great friendship built up between the people of Cowra and of Japan after the war cemetery, after we looked after the graves of the Japanese soldiers who were killed. And we tried to build on that friendship and learn a little of the culture of Japan and the history of the Japanese people.
Have there been any touching moments that you've witnessed here when the Japanese come back?
Yes. One family who their son was hung in the prisoner of war camp breakout, and they came back. They didn't know that their son had died during the breakout, and they saw the photo of him hanging from one of the huts, and they actually came out and planted a piece of his fiance's hair in his grave. That was a very touching moment.
And herein lies the message that is Cowra. It's no mistake the pond here is stocked with carp. The Japanese officers told their soldiers how the fish can swim against even the strongest current, how the carp, when caught, doesn't flinch, but dies a dignified death. In the words of Harry Gordon, the man who documented the events at Cowra in 1944, with a better knowledge of the Japanese mentality, the slaughter that was Cowra need never have occurred.
The report says Mr Lewis should be replaced, or a new position should be created with a reduced role and function, and that there should be a complete overhaul of senior staff. It seems to have laid the majority of the blame on Mr Lewis, saying that he's made a series of rash, unauthorised and improper decisions. These include the supply of an electoral roll in computer tape form to the then Alderman Don Geddes, a form that was not sold before, and that he also failed to inform the council of the sale. The invoices were supplied by the staff, but the inspectors note, "We find it difficult to appreciate their certainty when they can remember almost nothing else of the circumstances." This, according to the report, was a classic example of what it describes as inadequate records. Another matter of concern raised in the report was the Deputy City Engineer Mr Chapman's involvement with the often successful tender of the council engineering projects. According to the report, despite Mr Chapman's attempts to make his superiors aware of his association, senior staff showed reluctance to comprehend the necessity for public officials to stay at arm's length at the risk of arousing suspicion of favouritism. For that and other reasons, the report recommends an overhaul of senior council staff. The report also says there were items of irregularity about the terms of employment of Civic Theatre's promotion executive Louis Van Eysen and the termination of employment of the Matara Festival organiser John Young. The local government inspector's recommendation to sack the town clerk Barry Lewis has sent shockwaves through Newcastle. Mr Lewis refused to comment on the recommendation. Former Alderman Don Geddes says the report is political and Mr Lewis is being used as a scapegoat.
My total reaction is one of shock in relation to the town clerk, one of disgust that that's in fact occurred. It hurts me greatly to know that he's been sacked or been recommended for sacking. He doesn't deserve it. He has never deserved it. He's been a loyal member of the council. He's been a loyal friend to all the aldermen on the council, just not to me.
On the other side of the political fence, former Labor Alderman Jeff Parker says the report is fair.
Well, Danelle, generally I'm happy. I think it's a conservative document, but on the whole I think it's a fair document.
The Minister for Local Government, Kevin Stewart, says he will set up a committee of local government officers and the Administrator to discuss legislation changes to the Greater Newcastle Act, including the number of aldermen and the number of wards in the next Newcastle City Council. He says he'll be inviting comment from council officers and the public on these matters. So now it's up to the Administrator, Mr Colin Saunders, to make his decisions on the recommendations made by the inspectors. He says it'll take him quite a while to wade through all the information, but he says he agrees with the general thrust of the recommendations made in the report.
Since 1981, country newspapers have reported and headlined the successes of fat steers bred by Ray and Jocelyn Bergman, steers from the river flats of Singleton that have won ribbons and championships at the Sydney and Brisbane Royal Shows, at the National Steer Show at Dubbo, and as well at many Hunter Valley shows. The Bergmans show steers as others show stud bulls, and far from being a hobby sideline of their 90-cow breeding herd, it's a full-time occupation. Although looking at Ray riding tall in the saddle, it's easy to see it's more a pleasure than hard work. These are the types of animals that have helped make his reputation, principally of Charolais and Charolais crossbreeding. Although being an innovator and an experimenter, Ray has trialled more than 10 breeds and their crosses over the last decade to achieve this result, and a better line of hindquarters you'd be hard-pressed to find anywhere. According to Ray, the secret lies in an understanding of beef genetics and selecting what the market and the judges need.
Well, in 1982 and 1983, we won a lot of competitions, champion carcasses. In 1984, we crashed. Now, we used some of the North American bloodlines, we used some of the Australian bloodlines and about 3 or 4 different breeds, and they just weren't feeding. Well, now I'm back on the road to success. I mean, you've got to have depth of body. We look at an animal like we look at a wedge, and that's looking at it from the rear to the front, not the other way around.
So you're looking for those big, fleshy hindquarters?
That's right. We look for depth of body. We look for a butterfly back. We look at their cod. We look at their brisket, but it's all in the breeding of them.
Ray obviously has a keen eye for a beef animal and also considerable expertise in feeding up his steers to be at their peak come showtime. And depending on the animal, that involves between 60 and 90 days on a special diet. He says steer competitions serve to highlight the commercial attributes of different strains of cattle and to also pinpoint market trends. His experiences, successes and yes, even failures over the past years have prompted him now to utilise some of the oldest genes available in the cattle world to try to produce an even better product. And these calves are the first results of his introduction of British white blood.
We did see a British white over the fence one day, and I didn't have a better vealer, so I thought, well, I'd better join this fella. And we've actually started on the British whites, and we're crossing British whites with the Charolais, and we're crossing the Charolais with the British whites. But prior to this, we have used about 10 breeds over the last 4 or 5 years, trying them, and we've had remarkable success with some of them, especially the three-way cross animals.
LGPA President Michael Tooth says agriculture has been singled out as the only industry unable to write off losses against other forms of income, with an off-farm income ceiling of $15,000 per annum. There's also been widespread criticism of the capital gains tax element and the hidden death duties component. This, according to the rural lobby, will lock families onto the same farm forever and will have an immediate discounting effect on farmland values, because buyers will automatically discount purchase prices for the impact of the tax. This in turn, it's claimed, will accelerate the current rate of farm foreclosures by banks. These matters aside, the rural community seems to welcome the move towards a flatter rate of income tax. This was John Carron's response to the tax package last week.
Well, the taxation rates will be lower. I think there'll be less pressure on pushing up land values, therefore they'll be able to adjust farm size more easily. Only real capital gains will be taken into account, and if they die and transfers to their spouse and then to the children, there is still no capital gain. So basically, most of the genuine farmers, the family farmers, there's absolutely no impact whatsoever. Sure, if they sell it sometime down the track, but even then, as it is only real capital gain with all the losses and indefinite carry forward, taking into account the money they've expended on building up the asset, the taxation impact is going to be minimal.
The flag above the City Hall was flying slightly below full mast this morning. It may well have been an oversight, but many in the adjacent roundhouse saw it as an omen of things to come. The fear stems from the local government report, which describes the promotional system as inbred, the staff as ill-trained, and senior staff lacking the ability to effectively manage the workers or delegate authority.
Local Government Minister Stewart says the employees have nothing to worry about. He wants to involve the unions in the decision-making process when it comes to changes in the administration. No one from the unions was available for comment today, but a spokesman says they'll be meeting next week to discuss the controversial report.
Mr Stewart has refused to comment on the ramifications of the report, which recommends the replacement of Town Clerk Barry Lewis, because he says he doesn't wish to preempt any rational discussion on changes to the Greater Newcastle Act. Mr Stewart was quoted as saying jokingly that if worse came to worst, he could get rid of the Newcastle City Administrator, Mr Saunders, as well.
Did you take seriously Mr Stewart's comment that he could get rid of you too if you didn't do something about Mr Lewis?
Oh, it's a factual comment, but basically, you know, it's in reply to a loaded question that's been put to him, and of course, you know, it's the obvious answer if they say, well, if Mr Saunders doesn't do this, what will you do? And he obviously said, well, you know, I can get rid of him too, and which is true, but he hasn't put the heavy hand on me at all.
So you're confident you can make these decisions without Mr Stewart's interference?
Oh yes, I'm sure of it.
Good morning everyone and welcome. Well, according to reports, New South Wales lags about 15 years behind other states with regard to conveyancing. And when we talk about conveyancing, we're talking about the buying and selling of real estate. And quite frankly, any moves that are about to be introduced to improve the system will have my full support because, quite frankly, they are archaic. Now, let me come back to basics. A couple of months ago, I was told of two situations involving the purchase and the sale of some real estate. Now, on both occasions, and I'm just talking about two conveyancings out of hundreds of thousands of a year in this great country of ours, the instructions were given for the deposit monies to be invested. And that's something I've suggested from time to time, as many of you know. Now, on date of settlement, when all settlements were made, we found on both occasions that the deposit monies had not been invested, and the question I must ask and the vendors must ask is why those instructions weren't carried out. But let me continue. In addition to this, after the settlements had been made, the solicitors concerned wrote to the agents saying, please account to the vendors, the sellers, for the balance of the deposit. Now, believe it or not, we're talking about in this day and age of 1985, in the age of computers and fast communications, the letter from the solicitor to the agent took 3 or 4 days, and once again, I'm not being overly critical of Australia Post. And once again, the agent concerned sent the deposit back to the solicitor, which took another 3 or 4 days. The solicitors concerned then sent the deposit money to the vendors, which took another 3 or 4 days. So we're talking about 12 days by way of delay. And we're talking about amounts of $100,000 on both occasions, and that's going to cost the persons concerned a lot of money. Why can't common sense be used? And why can't the solicitors of this state or of this country say to the agents, please account for the deposit to the vendors direct and not go through that third party? I'll leave those thoughts with you, and I'll see you next Monday.
As has already been said,
the state member for Waratah, John Price, joins the foundation from today, along with the Mayor of Lake Macquarie City Council, Jeff Pasterfield. They join Alec Young and John Pesha as trustees, whose job it is to vet applications for funds. So far, the foundation has supported the completion of the Christchurch Cathedral and was a major source of funds for the Lake Macquarie Police Citizens Youth Club, which was officially opened by the Prime Minister in October 1983. Tomorrow, the Commissioner of Police, Mr John Avery, will award Kevin Parry life governorship for his contribution to the club. The foundation will now go public and invite private and corporate involvement in projects planned for the Hunter.
The Lake Macquarie Council met in their chambers last night to discuss local matters, one of which concerned the annual allowance for the Lord Mayor Jeff Pasterfield. Council voted to increase the Mayor's existing income to $23,000, a rise of $5,000. Also on the agenda was the election of a new Deputy Mayor. The position is elected every year, and in last night's vote, Alderman Nicholson narrowly defeated Alderman Tousis 8 votes to 6. Alderman Nicholson will now take over the duties of assisting the Mayor when needed, as well as chairing future meetings in the event of the Mayor's absence.
No public access. Go straight into questions without notice. I think it's all the
The mock trials have been organised by the Law Society of New South Wales and have involved more than 2,000 Year 10 and 11 students from throughout the state. It's the 5th year that the competition has been running, and the two teams competing in yesterday's semi-finals were Skeggs from Darlinghurst in Sydney and Newcastle's St Francis Xavier School. Each team in the competition consists of 2 witnesses, 2 barristers, a constable and a solicitor. Together they are presented with a criminal case and must follow correct court proceedings in an attempt to win their side's story. Both the prosecution and the defence teams are judged on knowledge of law and legal points, clarity of expression, manner and their ability to understand the court procedures. In yesterday's hearing, representing the defence, St Francis Xavier won the case. They'll go into the finals to be held this month, which will mean hours of work in preparation. But according to would-be barrister Matthew Hartley, the experience is worth it.
What have you got out of the experience?
Well, it's taught us courtroom procedure. Most barristers and solicitors who come out of universities and go through the College of Knowledge down in Sydney don't really learn anything about courtroom procedure. They learn the things, but they don't learn to cross-examine. No one who cross-examines the first time does it well, but this has taught us to cross-examine.
In tonight's NBN News, we bring you the story of the lucrative sponsorship deal won by a young local surfer. Newcastle surfing champion Nicky Wood has signed Australia's biggest surfing sponsorship deal for a junior. For the details of this story and all the other news, watch NBN's Hour of News tonight at 6.